The clink of the knife against my mother's crystal glass was a sound I knew by heart. It was the sound that always preceded a performance, and tonight's was no different. She beamed, her eyes sweeping the Thanksgiving table, pausing for effect. Lily's wedding was just gorgeous, she announced, her voice carrying over the murmur of relatives. She let the praise hang in the air before turning the spotlight. "So, Kat, when's yours?" A few polite, nervous titters rippled through the room. My father's focus remained locked on the turkey, carving with an intensity usually reserved for open-heart surgery. And Lily, my perfect sister, said nothing. She just watched me, her gaze a careful, practiced study of feigned innocence. I felt the weight of it, the old, familiar script settling in. I laid my fork down quietly, the silver clicking against the china. "I already had a wedding," I said, my voice clear in the sudden quiet. "You received the invitation." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The chatter died, replaced by a silence so complete and sharp it felt like a physical presence. Into that void, my father's whisper was a painful scrape. "We didn't get anything." I reached for my purse at my feet. It was time. Everything they had buried, every ignored milestone and dismissed achievement, was about to see the light of this perfectly set table. The dynamic wasn't a mystery to me, I'd mapped it in childhood. My family worshipped at the altar of symmetry, curated photo albums, flawlessly narrated events, stories polished for public consumption. And in every single one, Lily was the shining centerpiece. For a long time, I accepted this as the natural order. In every family, I reasoned, one star needs a stagehand. I learned to be the stagehand. By high school, our roles weren't just habit, they were institution. Mom managed Lily's life like a full-time publicist, orchestrating dance recitals, cheerleading triumphs, a hallway shrine of ribbons and trophies. On the rare occasions my own world intersected with theirs, a science fair win, my college acceptance letter, my mother would offer a vague, polite smile. "Can we take a picture later, sweetheart? The light is perfect for Lily's portrait right now." I didn't fight the system. I mastered invisibility instead, becoming an expert in observation and quiet endurance. Then came Seattle. Moving wasn't an act of rebellion, it was my first full breath of air. I built a life in a city that asked nothing of my past. My apartment had windows that caught the morning light, and it was filled with the clutter of a real existence, research papers on aquatic ecosystems, the comforting smell of coffee Eton always had ready. My work mattered, not for its social currency, but for its substance. It was mine. And Eton, he was the revelation. He saw me, not a supporting character in Lily's story, but the protagonist of my own. He listened. He remembered the small things. His family, Madison and Stephen, offered a kind of attention that was entirely new. Their hugs were real embraces, not obligatory gestures. Their questions were curious, not critical. They were present. It was a quiet, profound education in what belonging could feel like. When Eton proposed on a misty June morning by the water, my yes was immediate and certain. We planned a wedding for us, a small coastal chapel, a handful of beloved friends, uncomplicated joy. My one secret, stubborn hope was that my family would choose, just once, to be there for me. For my event. For my happiness. I hand-designed the invitations. I sent them with tracking and signature confirmation, knowing my family's chronic carelessness with things that concerned me. I checked the status daily, watching as each one was marked delivered. I allowed myself a fragile hope. And then, nothing. The silence was absolute. No calls. No texts. Not a word in the family group chat. As weeks bled into months, I concocted every possible excuse, a postal error, a surprise in the works. But beneath the denial, a colder, darker understanding began to crystallize. That silence wasn't an accident. It was intentional. Someone had ensured those invitations were never seen. I carried that chilling knowledge with me to the Thanksgiving table. And when my mother tapped her glass, smiling her perfect hostess smile, I was ready. The performance was over. It was time for the truth. The silence after the wedding wasn't passive. It was an active, growing thing. It started as a quiet absence, A missing congratulations card, a call that never came, but soon it seeped into everything, a slow, cold leak that warped the foundation of my days. I told myself the reasonable things. People are busy, life gets chaotic. But as days stacked into weeks, the quiet morphed. It gained weight and intention. It wasn't an oversight, it was a statement. I tried to bridge it. A call to my mother rang out, landing in a voicemail box I knew she rarely checked. A text to my father received a benign, "So busy right now, talk soon." That talk never materialized. Then, one idle Tuesday, I opened the family group chat, a digital relic from my college years. My name was gone. Not removed with a dramatic announcement, but quietly erased, as if my membership had simply expired. The deletion was so silent it echoed. One night, standing at the sink with suds up to my wrists, I finally let it slip to Eton. "The family chat," I said, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. "My name's gone. Probably just a glitch." My voice cracked on the last word, betraying me. He turned off the faucet, dried his hands slowly, and leaned against the counter. His eyes held no judgment, only a focused calm. "Kat," he asked gently, "did they ever actually RSVP? Even a no?" I shook my head, the simple truth suddenly humiliating. Not a word. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply said, "Let's look for proof." He guided me through the digital trails I'd been too heartsick to pursue, the email activity logs for the account I'd used to send the wedding announcement. And there, in cold, impersonal data, was the confirmation. The email had been opened at my parents' home address. And 37 seconds later, it had been deleted. Permanently. The timestamp was a brand. This was no mistake. Someone had seen my news and had made a conscious decision to bury it. The worst part wasn't the discovery. It was the instant, bone-deep certainty of who. Lily. I could see her at our childhood kitchen island, a queen presiding over the Daily Mail, a natural-born gatekeeper. She was the family archivist, the password holder, the arbiter of what constituted important news. Everything flowed through her. Of course it had. The pieces clicked together with a cruel, perfect logic. She was in the throes of planning her own spectacular September wedding, a gala with hundreds, a storybook dress, a spectacle designed for maximum admiration. Her whole world was built on being the sole focus. My simple, joyful June wedding wasn't just a separate event. In Lily's economy of attention, it was a threat, a competing headline. And she had never learned to share the spotlight. I needed more than a gut feeling. I pulled up the delivery confirmations for the physical invitations. For receipts. For signatures of receipt. 3 were the loopy, indifferent scrawls of a delivery driver. The 4th was different. Neat, confident, and horribly familiar. Lily's signature. I stared at the digital copy of her handwriting, each loop and line a tiny betrayal. She hadn't misplaced them. She hadn't forgotten. She had intercepted them. She had taken my happiness into her hands and decided it wasn't worthy of an audience. Eton's hand covered mine, warm and solid. "Kat," he murmured. "What do you want to do?" I had no answer. Anger felt too clean, too straightforward. What I felt was a profound, weary devastation, an old, familiar loneliness cracked wide open. How do you confront people whose greatest sin against you is simply choosing, again and again, to look away? Thanksgiving loomed. My first instinct was to avoid it, to spare myself the theater of it all. To let them have their perfect narrative, one where I simply faded into the background without a fuss. But that narrative was the problem. My silent compliance had been the mortar holding their false world together. So I made a choice. I would go. And I would not go empty-handed. I would carry the truth with me, a quiet bomb in my purse, ready to shatter their perfect silence. The Thanksgiving tableau was a masterpiece of curated normalcy. Starched white linen, silver that gleamed under the chandelier, a centerpiece of gourds and candles, it was a photo waiting to happen. But crossing the threshold was like walking into a vacuum. The old, familiar pressure descended immediately, settling on my shoulders like a leaden mantle I'd outgrown, but was expected to wear anyway. Lily held court by the fireplace, a vision in cashmere. Her husband, Caleb, adjusted a strand of her hair with the focused precision of a stylist on a shoot. My mother was a hummingbird of activity around the turkey, her commentary a nonstop broadcast of Lily's September wedding details, the floral designer flown in from Amsterdam, the custom monograms, the celebrity-adjacent guest. My father poured wine with the weary automation of a man performing a familiar ritual. No one looked at me. No one said, "How's married life?" The wedding that had transformed my world 6 months ago did not exist in theirs. I took the seat directly opposite Lily. She didn't meet my gaze. Her performance required no audience participation. She was an expert in the language of pointed silence. The dinner conversation flowed like a rehearsed tribute, accolades for Lily's taste, her planning prowess, her sheer gravitational pull. Each compliment was a tiny hammer, nailing shut the coffin of my own ignored celebration. For her, they moved mountains. For me, they couldn't even acknowledge a molehill. Then came the signal, the delicate ting of my mother's knife on crystal. A hush fell, obedient and expectant. Lily's wedding was simply stunning, Mom declared, her eyes finding Lily's for a quick, affirming glance. She let the praise linger before delivering the punchline she thought was charming. "So, Kat, when's yours?" A wave of knowing chuckles swept the table. My father's carving knife hovered over the breast meat, caught in indecision. Lily's eyes remained fixed on her china plate, her body preternaturally still. That stillness was her tell. She was braced. For a lifetime, I would have absorbed the blow with a tight smile. I would have made a joke at my own expense, diffusing the tension, preserving the peace. But the peace was a lie, and I was done paying for it. I set my fork down with deliberate calm. The sound was small but final in the quiet room. "I already had a wedding," I stated, my voice level clear. 6 months ago. The effect was instantaneous and total. It was as if all the oxygen had been violently evacuated from the room. I let the shockwave expand, feeling the structure of their perfect evening tremble. Then I added, the words dropping into the silence like stones, "You received the invitation." Utensils froze midair. My mother's festive expression dissolved into blank shock. My father's eyes widened, his face a mask of pure confusion. Across the table, Lily didn't move a muscle. Her lack of surprise was the most damning evidence of all. She had been waiting for this. "Kat," my father began, his tone the careful one reserved for defusing bombs, "we didn't get any invitation." There it was. The foundational lie. The collective, unconscious agreement to erase what was inconvenient. In that moment, a profound clarity washed over me, cold and clean. This wasn't about rage. It was about truth. "I thought you might say that," I replied, my voice still soft. I reached into my bag beside me, movements measured and calm. I placed my phone on the tablecloth. The screen flared to life, its light harsh against the warm candlelight. Reflected in the curves of the wine glasses, the flame now seemed to dance along a sharp, digital edge. Every single person at the table was riveted. This was the uncrossable line, the moment I ceased to be a character in their story and became the author of my own. My finger touched the cool glass of the screen, calling up the evidence. The truth, so long buried, now rose within me, a relentless and undeniable tide. The tap of my finger on the phone screen was a trigger. The atmosphere in the dining room didn't shatter, it reconfigured, becoming dense and charged, like the dead calm before a hurricane makes landfall. The delivery confirmations appeared in a stark, orderly list. For shipments. For signatures of receipt. I enlarged the first one, rotating the phone slowly so its glow fell on every face. There, at the bottom of the screen, was the proof in elegant, looping cursive, Lily's signature. My mother's sharp inhale was a tiny rupture in the quiet. My father leaned in, squinting as if physical proximity could change the data. Caleb stiffened, his eyes ping-ponging between the damning screen and his wife's impassive face, a stranger dawning in his gaze. Lily herself was a statue, not a flicker. I felt the frantic thrum of my own heartbeat in my wrists, but my voice emerged detached, eerily steady. "Delivered and signed for on April 23rd, I stated. All 4 invitations. The signature is Lily's." This new silence was different. It was the silence of a carefully constructed set being exposed as plywood and paint. "Kat," my father ventured, his voice thin with hope, "this has to be a mistake." "It's not." I swiped, bringing up the official Postal Service tracking log. "Priority mail. Signature required. Confirmed delivery to this address." They weren't lost. I let the implication hang, heavy and clear. They were intercepted. My mother began shaking her head, a frantic, mechanical motion. "No. No, that's ridiculous. Lily would never." "Enough." The word was quiet, but it carried a finality that cut her off. "You have spent a lifetime telling me what Lily wouldn't do. You've never once acknowledged what she does." The words struck home. My mother fell silent, her mouth a tight line. Caleb found his voice, low and strained. "Lily? Did you sign for these?" She blinked, a slow, deliberate reset. "I don't remember. I get the mail sometimes. I never saw any invitations." I said nothing. I had mastered the art of their silence. Now I wielded my own, letting its weight press down on her denial. My father, his focus now a laser on Lily, asked the obvious. "You didn't notice 4 packages from your sister? Around the time you knew she was engaged. I'm not her personal secretary." Lily snapped, the veneer cracking to reveal a flash of petulant anger. "A tactical error." "Sweetheart, don't," my mother tried to interject, automatically leaping to her defense. "Let her speak," I said, my calm unnerving. "She's been the family spokesperson for long enough." Lily's eyes narrowed at me. What is that supposed to mean? Instead of answering, I navigated to the final piece of evidence, the email server logs. "This is the activity for the family email account," I explained, my tone clinical. "The wedding announcement I sent was opened here on April 24th. 30 seconds later, it was permanently deleted." My father's jaw worked. "Who manages that account?" The question was a formality. The answer sat at the table, her composure beginning to fray. Finally, Lily broke. "I didn't delete anything." The protest was too loud, too fast. I tilted my head, a study in cold curiosity. "Then why does the log show the deletion came from your laptop?" Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. It must have been an accident." "Why are you ganging up on me?" "I'm not ganging up. I'm presenting facts." My mother rallied, grasping for the old script. "For heaven's sake, why would Lily want to hide your wedding? What possible reason could she have? It's absurd." "Why?" I repeated, turning fully to Lily now. "Because my wedding was in June. Yours was in September." I held her gaze, watching the truth flicker behind her eyes. "You couldn't stand the thought of anyone's attention being divided. You couldn't share the spotlight for a single season." She recoiled as if struck. "You're insane. You always twist things to make yourself the victim." "No," I said, my voice flat. "You did this. The evidence isn't twisted. It's your handwriting." Caleb pushed his chair back, the legs screeching against the floor. "Lily," he said, his voice hollow. "Is this true?" She looked down at her hands, her breath coming in shallow hitches. "It's just, she makes it so easy. Everyone thinks Quiet Cat is so sweet, so undemanding. She doesn't ask for anything, so everyone feels like they have to overcompensate just by noticing her. It makes the rest of us feel." "Feel what?" I prompted, my voice barely a whisper. She slammed her palms on the table, jolting the silverware. "It makes us feel guilty. Like we're not trying hard enough. Like nothing we do is ever enough because Saint Cat is just so easy to please." The confession erupted, raw and ugly, finally naming the poison that had festered for years. I didn't flinch. "So you buried my wedding to soothe your own guilt?" "Because my simple happiness was an indictment of your exhausting spectacle." "Stop it," she breathed, the fight draining out of her. "Cat," my father said, a plea in his voice. "We didn't know. If we had seen the invitations, we would have." "You would have come," I finished, the old ache now a cold, hard stone. "Just like you came to every single one of her events. Just like you found the time for every one of her needs, while mine were always an afterthought, a scheduling conflict." He looked away, defeated. My mother's face was a mask of pained defiance. "You can't blame us for everything. We did our best." Your best, I said slowly, was reserved for Lily. I received the leftovers, and you called it love. That's not fairness. That's favoritism. Lily slumped in her seat, the embodiment of collapsed pretense. The grand edifice of her narrative was crumbling, and for the first time, she had no script. The clarity that filled me was profound and liberating. I looked at the three of them, the architects of my loneliness, and spoke the truth that had crystallized in the silence they'd given me. I didn't lose a family today, I said, my voice ringing clear in the ravaged quiet. I stopped pretending the one I was born into ever really existed. My mother gasped, a hand flying to her chest. How can you say something so terrible? Because it's true. It breaks the story, doesn't it? The story where Lily is the star. Where Dad is the benign bystander. Where you are the devoted matriarch. And where I am the agreeable ghost. The problem you never had to name. No one ever called you a problem, my father murmured, his eyes sad. You didn't need to, I replied. Your actions wrote the definition. Over and over. Caleb buried his face in his hands. Lily whispered my name, a single, fractured sound that held a lifetime of tangled rivalry and sudden, terrifying accountability. The power in the room, for the first time, had irrevocably shifted. I rose from my seat, the movement deliberate and final. The chair's gentle scrape against the floor was the period at the end of their sentence. I will not beg for a seat at this table anymore, I said, my voice carrying a newfound steadiness. I will not petition for your presence. I will not pretend that Lily's actions or your inaction don't cause pain. And I will no longer interpret your silence as anything but tacit approval. I drew a deep, cleansing breath. I am finished. My father stood abruptly, his hand outstretched as if to bridge the sudden, uncrossable distance. Kat, please don't go. We can work this out. We are working it out, I corrected, meeting his pleading gaze. For the first and the last time. On my terms. My mother's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, her voice a fragile tremor. We can make this right. You cannot repair what you refuse to even see, I stated, the truth of it now a simple, cold fact. And you have chosen not to see it for most of my life. I gathered my coat, and with each motion, slipping one arm in, then the other, a tangible weight lifted from my spirit. As I walked toward the foyer, the sounds of their crumbling world followed me, a choked sob from Lily. My mother whispering my name like a lost incantation, my father's hollow admission, we should have looked. We should have asked. Their dawning regret was a burden I finally, blessedly, set down. It was not mine to carry. I opened the heavy front door, and a wave of crisp night air rushed in, scouring away the stale tension of the house. I paused on the threshold, turning just enough to deliver the final, clarifying truth. You didn't miss my wedding, I said, my words clear in the quiet dark. You made a conscious choice to overlook it. Then I stepped through, allowing the door to swing shut behind me. Not with a slam, but with a firm, resonant click. It was the sound of a boundary becoming a wall. And the profound silence that enveloped me as I walked to my car was no longer oppressive. It was mine. A peaceful, owned quiet. Eton had our apartment door open before my key even touched the lock, as if he'd sensed the shift in the universe. He took one look at my face, a mix of exhaustion and eerie calm, and asked for no report. He simply folded me into his arms, holding me with a solid, wordless certainty until the last of the internal tremors subsided. It was pure presence, a shelter my birth family had never learned to build. The next morning, his parents, Madison and Stephen, called with an invitation for a simple breakfast. There was no grand gesture, no awkward pity, just the warm clatter of plates and the smell of coffee. Over toast, Madison reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her eyes kind and direct. You are family here, Kat, she said. Not as an extension of my son. Because you, yourself, matter. A week later, Lily's email arrived. It was lengthy, littered with the language of therapy and hollow accountability, admitting to more than I'd anticipated. I read every word. And then I closed the tab. My silence was my reply. My father began to call. Every few days, a tentative voicemail or a text asking about the weather. Small, shaky steps on a bridge he was trying to build from his side. I allowed the attempt. Then, a plain manila envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was one of my wedding invitations, the paper slightly creased. A note was absent, but its return was a message in itself. He had found it, tucked away in a storage box. It was the closest thing to a real apology he could muster, and I accepted it for what it was. My mother sent nothing. No calls, no letters. And for the first time, that void did not ache like a fresh wound. It simply existed. It was her answer, and I finally found the peace to accept it. I once believed family was a fortress you defended at all costs, no matter how many arrows came from within. But now, standing in the kitchen of my own home, listening to Eton hum as he cooked and the echo of a friend's laughter from the living room, I understood the real truth. Family is not a title bestowed by blood. It is a verb. It is built by those who show up, who listen deeply, who stay. It is chosen and earned, day after day. And sometimes, the most courageous, loving act is to turn and walk, without looking back, from those who never bothered to learn how to hold you. If any piece of this story resonates with you, you are not alone. Wherever you are watching from, your experience matters. Share it if you wish. And remember, it is never too late to choose the silence that belongs to you or to build the family you deserve. Heart emoji.